What if the biggest gift of quitting drinking isn't better sleep, more energy, fewer hangovers? What if it's getting your future back? So many women think alcohol-free living is about what you're giving up. Today's guest believes it's actually about discovering a life you haven't even imagined yet. And what if you've ever wondered whether your best years might still be ahead of you? This conversation is for you. Welcome to Sober and Lit,
the podcast for women who want to get sober, stay sober, and live a life that's way more lit than it ever was with wine.
We're your hosts, Ruby and Susan, two alcohol freedom coaches keeping it real with stories, tools, and zero judgment.
Whether you're sober curious or all in, you're in the right place.
Let's feel lit, alcohol free. Welcome back to the Sober and Lit podcast. Today we have a really special guest, one of my dear friends, Lorna. Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Yeah. Lorna Wilson is a life and alcohol-free coach in Canada who came into this work in midlife. She believes the second half of life holds far more runway than the first, than most women even imagine. You know, her own alcohol-free journey opened up a door she never expected to walk through. And now she helps women reconnect with their passions, rediscover their purpose, and build a relationship with the future selves they're still becoming. So she's co-created Limiting Belief Lab and is a frequent podcast guest in conversations about freedom, reinvention, and what becomes possible when you stop drinking and start living. So welcome, Lorna.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here with you guys today. It's awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. Well, the first question I usually love to ask guests is like, can you take us back, to your relationship with alcohol and the moment you began to realize there might be something more waiting for you on the other side of drinking, because we'd love to hear your story, Lorna.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I guess my drinking story is similar to many people in that, I think in my early 20s and 30s, and I didn't drink a lot of alcohol. For me, my story started more when I was in my 50s. Prior to that, I was widowed early. My husband passed away when I was 29 and had a little 2.5-year-old daughter, and we were forging our way through life, and overall had to find some resilience inside of me that I didn't even know I had. And getting into later on in life and finding my way through some careers and things, life was going along pretty well. And luckily I was moving kind of, not necessarily, I won't say up the ladder, but my jobs overall started to gain a little bit more responsibility and in some respects a little bit of notoriety because I started to work within our city in a downtown association. So I would do things with retailers. And so I was sometimes in front of the camera, sometimes I was, being interviewed for different things. Or sometimes I was dealing with really, really angry people, which can happen when you're in jobs like that. And ultimately, I ended up in my 50s working for our city and within the context of City Hall and more responsibility. And when that started to happen, that's when it was just so easy to go home at night and, get into your chair and have your glass of wine and the rest is kind of a pretty common story. It wasn't that I was, didn't get to the point of being like super physically addicted or anything like that. But when you're in your 50s and you're starting into menopause and that it's a combination, you guys know, is just not good, right? So finally getting into my mid 50s, later 50s, I was just feeling so ill most of the time when I did drink. And I thought, I have to find a way to stop. And so much like, again, a number of the coaches that I know, we find programs like this Naked Mind or Zero Proof Life or others. And we eventually find our way through. And that was my story, is I can remember thinking, I just want to understand what's going on in my brain right now. I want to understand what this is doing to my body, because if I can scare myself enough, then I know I'm going to quit. And along came the book, This Naked Mind. And it wasn't that I scared myself enough. It was just suddenly like the floodgates of information opened, and I thought, holy smokes, like, not only is this a very real and dangerous thing that I'm playing around with, but I can also change the neural pathways in my brain, and I can actually make this thing work. And then I was hooked on that journey of trying to figure it out. And it wasn't immediate, by any stretch. I think, it took me a year or more to kind of just play around, but eventually, I just started to stop. I stopped. So, yeah. Yeah.
So glad you did, because you're the most
Me
amazing.
too.
And yeah, I mean, well, when you look back, I think, what do you think alcohol, took from you? You mentioned your health, like you were starting to feel ill, but yeah,
It took so many things. I just was generally the person. I often say to people, the person on the outside was not the person on the inside. We were two completely different beings. I could be standing up in front of city council and talking about some report or whatever, and being, and have, all of the ability to be able to describe what I was doing and everything else. However, on the inside, I was dying. I was just dying. And I mean, I don't mean physically necessarily. I wasn't certainly doing myself any good, but I had such, I just really felt like I didn't know what I was doing, that I was an imposter, that I wasn't educated enough. I didn't know what I was talking about. The inner critic was just so loud. And, again, when you're in your 50s and you felt like this for a long time, that can be a pretty big voice. And that's exactly. So, alcohol took it away from me, because it just made it louder. It made, the mornings harder. It made me feel less confident. It made me feel anxious. And at that time, I didn't know about anxiety and all these other things, but I certainly was feeling it. So it took a lot away. Sleep, I mean, all the typical things that that the substance does, but it was more than that. I wasn't who I could be, I really wasn't. It was just a facade.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Not
think that's
fun.
so true. Like that sounds so similar to my story because I started drinking for my job like around 47, 48 is when it started ramping up. And it's weird how this is just the paradox of alcohol, how we drink to solve the problem that alcohol actually then amplifies and makes
Yeah.
worse. And then we get stuck in that cycle of, oh, no, drinking for the anxiety or
Yeah.
drinking for the
Yeah.
loud inner critic. And alcohol is only making it worse because we're reinforcing it with the reward,
Yeah.
and so it's like, oh, if I'm really loud and mean to Susan or Lorna, then I get a drink. I mean, it's negative reinforcement, but I remember sharing that with a client. She's like, oh, that was a big awareness for her. Like, wow, I'm mean to myself and I'm rewarding that behavior by drinking.
I just, I remember having times where I would look in the mirror, and the things I would say to myself, I won't repeat here, but it was, oh, I'm getting teary. It was awful. It was just an awful place. And I didn't know how to get out of it. I just really did not know how to get out of it until really understanding. And then I moved into this other place of being really angry. And what I mean by that is, at that time where we live right now is a wine region, and there's outside the door there's like 50 wineries, and just understanding the industry itself, starting to understand how we are inundated with messaging about how great this is for us, and all those beliefs that we have about it. I went through a phase of just kind of going, wow, like, come on, people. We need to figure this out. Thankfully, that got tempered, and today I can have a reasonable conversation, but it was almost like I needed to do that too, just to realize that, hey, we're being duped here.
yeah.
We really
I
are.
I really have the same experience, Lorna, where I got so mad because I'm also a lot of our listeners know I'm right in the wine country, and like I just got so angry at the alcohol industry and the wine industry, and that's what fueled me to become a coach. Maybe that helped you too, because I know you're also a coach, and I would love to like shift gears now. So we talked about how horrible it was, but like now you know what opened up for you. You became alcohol free, and yeah, let's talk
Yeah,
about
well,
that side of things. Uh-huh.
well, it was really fun. I had learned about the profession of coaching again in my early 50s and through the work within the municipality because we had coaches and that sort of thing offered to us sometimes. And so I knew I knew about the work and what it was like. And so I had decided that I was going to go off on my own and become professionally certified, which I did do that. And I learned so much about about the profession, about how to coach, those sorts of things. But I also remember the day, and I think this is the thread of what we're talking about today. I remember the day of being, flew down to Vancouver. Went into the space where we were having our lessons and everything and met the people. There was 20 of us that were being trained in that particular cohort. And at the end of that day, when I got back into the Airbnb that I was staying in, the tears were just flowing down my face. And it wasn't out of anything other than pure joy. And it was because I just knew I had found something that I'd always wanted to really do. I had no idea where it was going to go. I was still working. I was, a mom and still doing my regular stuff. But there was a light to switch that just went on that went, here's a path for you. I think this is a path for you. And so what happened was I quit drinking, and all of a sudden it was the very first cohort for This Naked Mind. I'm reading this email saying, and I looked at my husband and I said, looks like I'm going to Denver. So, and that's what happened. I was in the first cohort of 40 some people that did training through T&M. And now over the course of these number of years, there's been many variations of things that I've done within the
Yeah.
coaching world. But
Wow.
I found my yeah.
That's amazing. What I'm hearing is when you're drinking, maybe it's not, you can't even access that.
No.
And it's almost like, so the world, what we want to say is what Susan and I too on this podcast over and over again is like, we call it sober and lit, like that lit, that fire inside you, it got lit up. And I hear
Mhm.
this over and over again with people to get alcohol free. It's like things that you can't even imagine, like all of a
Yeah.
sudden are presented to you. And it's
Yeah.
so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doors just keep opening. Yeah.
Yeah. The right
Mhm.
doors.
Yeah. Exactly. The right doors. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a new chapter. Yeah. So tell me more about how are you able to get that permission to go ahead and like reinvent yourself and like that's a big step to like become a coach when you were working for the city, right? Like that's yeah, me too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. I mean, I think a couple things. It became, with my story, it became just, it was off to the side and the things that I was doing off to the side. And suddenly the pull was really, I need to make this more part of me. And I did do some coaching actually with the city. I semi-retired from the work I was doing, and I came back and I knew originally I thought, oh, you're going to be like a career coach. And I started doing that and I think, yeah, okay, this isn't working for me. It just wasn't my thing because I'd had that experience of being lit, turning the light on. I just knew that there was something different that I could bring into a conversation with people. And that sort of led me to, the work of, and I'm sure you probably talked about Playing Big and Tara Moore and some of the, she's someone that I followed quite, diligently, did a couple of her courses and things. But the premise of it is about playing big as women. It's about finding our purpose at any particular stage of our lives because we forget. It's so easy to, whether alcohol's in the picture or it's in the rear view mirror, we can still forget and just play small. And, you know, and that's when you have the experience of coaching with people, and I know both of you have had this, where all of a sudden you see a light go on and there's a, you know, they start walking down a path of, well, I wonder if I could, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And with good coaching and encouragement, all of a sudden it just feels like I have to do this. You know, I really need to do this. I need to write the book. I need to start the podcast. I need to. And I say all that, but I also want to say too that it doesn't have to be those big things either. It doesn't. It can be anything that just feels like it's more of your more purpose. Now, when alcohol's in the frame, that's very hard to find because we can hide with alcohol too. Sometimes we know that we've got purpose and that we've got ability and we've got a little dream that's sitting back there. But, you know, I think I'll just sit and have a glass of wine first before I want to actually take that step.
And you know what's funny? Right before our call, we were talking. I know for a fact that you've helped 3, and they've come on our podcast, People Write Books.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carla Adkins, Tabin Almond, and Anna. So having that relationship with your future self and being able to play big in your life, it's so important, I think. And I'd love for you to just talk more about what you do to help women build that relationship with their future self.
Well, usually what I do is I start with we do a real deep dive into the inner critic and spend a lot of time there about that particular voice. And, you know, we explore sort of what that voice is saying, what it's trying to protect you from, where it came from, you know, what's the origin story of your inner critic, and just how that has played a role, you know, throughout your life. And then from there, we'll move into sessions where we talk about the future self. And I often will do 2 different things. Future self may have a visualization attached to it that I ask that person to do on their own. And then it's those coaching questions during that, as they come back and say, well, this is what I was experiencing and this is what I saw. And can ask some good coaching questions about, well, you know, what did that bring up for you? And what was it about that reminded you of when you were a kid? What was it that, you know, brought you such, you know, that joyful time? And just seeing where they, like, this is when just, you know, walking the path with the person and seeing where they take you. You know, where do they take you in that? And it's so great. You're nodding heads because I know you guys have been through this too. And it's just, as a coach, what a blessing to be able to sit and listen to a person's story like that. The other thing that I often do too is, you know, helping to create sort of a life purpose statement. And again, I'm going to qualify this by saying that it doesn't mean that this is a statement that it's going to be big and powerful and you're going to follow it for the rest of your days. But what it does do is it can help to just ground you in at this particular time and say, you know, I really feel like this is where I'm being drawn. This is where I feel that I need to be moving to next. And it can be something big. It can be something small. It can be leaving something. It can be, you know, it can carry on to all sorts of things. And, you know, I can share a story if you're open to that, just of a particular friend that I love telling this story. And it's of a woman who I had worked with. And so drinking wasn't part of her the coaching that we were doing, but she just really wanted to. She was, you know, a CA. She was working for a large organization. She was in her late 30s, early 40s, and she was just trying to find where, you know, she had gone through all the schooling and everything else, and she just really thought to herself that, you know, this was going to be it for the rest of her life, and it just wasn't enough. It wasn't her. You know, she knew that it just wasn't filling. It wasn't making her feel lit.
Yeah.
And so in the coaching, I said, well, tell me more. Like, tell me about, tell me what was going on when you were in university. And so she said, this just came out of the blue one day, and I get goosebumps every time I tell the story. So she's in this major city in Eastern Canada. She's riding on the bus. She's got all of her textbooks and stuff in her bag. And she says, and then there was another book in there that it was the one that I would always read. And which book was that? And she says, it was a cookbook. And she says, I was reading about recipes all the time. And that one comment led to this. It led to, well, what did that mean for you? I've always dreamt of having, this is in Quebec, and she says an auberge, which is a boutique hotel, like an Airbnb, like a bed and breakfast. And I can see it, and there would be yoga classes, and there would be this, and there would be that, and blah, blah, blah. And this dream started to really form as we talked and as we did a couple of different coaching sessions. And she just couldn't let it go, could not let this go. And fast forward to 2 years later, she and her husband sold their house here. They moved back to Eastern Canada. Today they have their auberge. It has won tourism awards across Canada for the place that it is. It's like a little mini retreat center. And every dream that she had, and what does she have behind her desk at the front desk when people come in? She has her life purpose statement. So, yeah, it's very cool. So,
Such a cool story.
isn't it
Thank you
fun?
for
Yeah.
sharing that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that
Fun.
that
Yeah.
yeah, that story outlines just so much that and what coaching can do, right? To just you start to ask the right questions and tell me more and what lights you up and
Mhm.
so many like of the women I know in midlife and clients and especially people
Mhm.
after you get alcohol free, it's like what is my purpose? And it kind of it's a place people that you don't know. And sometimes this can really help to kind of tease that out of you and
For
oh, what a
sure.
great story. Hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And for someone that, like myself and that who, has, overcame drinking and that I often find that we have shut our voice off. It's the only way I can kind of describe it. And often I'll have that conversation about where do you feel you're not being heard? And it might be in that relationship that they have within their own four walls, or it could be in the job, or it could be, they're shutting themselves down constantly all the time. Oh, I can't possibly think about that. There's no way that that could ever happen. That kind of, again, the inner critic and the limiting belief of that could never happen for me, right? And so when we can crack open those doors and just play and just dream, it's amazing how there can be some movement. And so you mentioned some of the coaches that have been on here and that was the case. I remember one of the coaches saying, I've always dreamt of being on stage, and we did this whole scenario about what being on stage meant. And Carla wouldn't have a problem with me saying, like, her thing was and she told you she didn't want to use that word cirrhosis. Well, all of a sudden, after opening up her voice, she's writing a book. I couldn't have predicted that. But I think, it doesn't matter about the age either. You can be, like, I'm 71, and I never thought ever we'd be doing this. I never thought I'd be on a podcast. I never ever. I didn't think that I would lead a group. I had no tech skills whatsoever, I thought. All of those things, they were all limiting beliefs. And, I look back and I laugh. I can remember and I tell me if this makes if you relate to this at all, like the room where you've got all the papers up and they're tacked to the wall because you think if you forget something, you're going to die on camera,
Oh,
right?
that's how I started. Yep.
Yeah, that sort
Yeah.
of thing. So,
Oh my
anyways,
gosh.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that leads me to yeah, age. Like if women are listening and they're in the midlife, because we Susan and I really relate to the midlife women, whether you're 55, 60, 65, 70, 75, and you think, oh, it's too late to change and reinvent myself or pursue something new. What would you want her to know?
Man, I tell you, I think what I want every woman to know is that we have a knowing inside of us. And I mean, that can be connected to your faith, that can be connected to whatever you choose to believe in. But how often does that voice speak to you? And when you're really, really listening and you act upon it, how often does the next right thing drop in front of you? All of a sudden, there's a conversation with someone else that says, have you ever thought about this? Like the paths open. But it starts with that. It starts with that belief, and it starts with that listening to that inner voice, and to find that, it can be simply just journaling. Like I'll start my journaling sessions. I don't journal every single day, but when I'm feeling really disconnected, I'll start the page by saying, "What would you like me to know today?" And then I just start writing, and seeing what comes from that. And ultimately, the page will, open up something that I'm thinking about or I'm wanting to do or whatever, right? So that's what I want her to know, is that you have this here. And if it's, we don't have time for alcohol. We just don't. Like, there's so much more. There's just so much more that's available to us. We really,
And we don't even know what it is. Like, it's so, I love to the world, just everything just opens up in so many ways. And it's just like it drops on your lap or something comes. And you described your situation where you got that email to become a coach. And my situation was kind of similar. I got that email and I'm like, oh, I never even thought about that. Like I'd never thought about that ever in my whole life. That was like a brand new thought. And then I started feeling some vibration in my body and it scared me. But I had this inner knowing that even though I was super scared, like, what does this even mean? I wanted to do it. Like, I just knew I was going to listen to that for the first time in my life, maybe. Because, I was thinking about your story about the cookbook, the lady, like, I wanted to be a yoga instructor when I was in college. But I never did it because I had to have a desk job and do, so there's so many things. Like what really lights you up is really important question to dig in, especially in midlife.
Yeah. And Susan, what about you? Tell me about
Yeah,
you.
Oh my
I want
gosh.
to.
Well, it's kind of similar. I had finished the path and I got the email and same thing. I felt like this something in my body and I wasn't sure. And then I was looking at my journal and I had written, this was probably late January, and I'd written in my vision board for that next year that I wanted to learn more about coaching. But I meant that at the time that for my regular career at Yale, that I wanted to do more about that. But then it was like, oh, okay, so that reinforced that. And I had been meditating and practicing with meditating and I saw myself on a podcast. And so I just thought, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And then I asked my daughter if she wanted to do a podcast with me. And she's like, no. And so, but then here we are, we have a podcast now, but that didn't even come for like 2 years later. But yeah, I had visions of these things. And yeah, it was a big deal for me to leave my career at Yale and do this. And I did do both for a while, but it was too much. It was burning me out. And I was like, okay, I'm living the same lifestyle I was when I was drinking. I'm just not drinking. And so I knew I needed to make a change. So same.
I love
Yeah.
that.
And, and again, it's just like, it could be any woman with any kind of a path that she has not discovered. I mean, we're talking on here about, moving on and doing coaching or, sometimes it's bigger careers or like my friend Natalie and opening up, auberge, that kind of thing. I can't state it enough. It can be something that, maybe you do want to leave your job or move into something else that's more aligned with who you are. There's that. Maybe sometimes it is harder stuff. Maybe it is leaving a relationship. Or sometimes what I find too, it's not necessarily making a big, I'm leaving the relationship, but it is changing yourself so that your voice is open, so that you're saying what your needs are. That you're taking that trip on your own and going to walk the Camino, or you're taking that trip on your own and going to spend the summer with your sister. I don't care what it is, but it's listening to that voice inside and what you're, what's calling you, what is calling you forth. And then, allowing that to be, said and stated within the context of the people around you and that sort of thing. So it can be many, many things, but the key part is actually the listening and paying attention to what's being said. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
hard
Beautiful.
subject.
It is.
So we have so much more time. I mean, really, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you remind me of Peggy Cooney, who now is 73 and running Zero Proof Experiences with Susie Streelman. And it's just like, she's just making so many things happen. And she's nominated by After Magazine as the most influential person. And she's just, she's making a difference. So you can do it at any age. In fact, I think
Yes.
your later ages, you're bringing all that wisdom with you. And
And that's a really important point, because in my, earlier on when I was talking about the inner critic and the inner critic being really loud, I had a couple of really amazing coaches early on that I was blessed to be able to work with now. And what they were talking about and saying to me too was, you are the product of every single experience you've had. From your dad drinking when you were a young kid to, getting married and being widowed early, to all of these life experiences that's my PhD, right? Is that those experiences. There's no one on this planet that's not the same story. We are the product of all of these things. And if you look back at them as being blessings, like I remember saying to someone one time, I says, yeah, my dad was alcoholic. He ended up in AA and blah, 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 blah. And I was telling this story and she went, oh, that must have been awful. And I said, it wasn't great, but it also put me on a path of learning that I wouldn't have gotten anywhere else. And I can't describe it any better than that. It sounds maybe a bit odd, but I think you know what I'm saying.
I do. Yeah.
Your tragedies can be things that build up a resilience in you, or an interest in you, or can open up a really wonderful pathway that you would not have expected ever
Right.
to be the case.
Yeah.
Because my dad was a drinker.
Yeah, the coaching question I often ask is like, what's the gift in that? Yeah, and I even say, that I really resonate with Laura McCowan's like, we are the luckiest. Like, I finally realized I was lucky to have had alcohol addiction because it's what brought me to where I am today and who I am today and what I'm doing today. And I wouldn't want that any other way. So yeah.
Same.
I love that, Lorna. Yeah.
yeah, same. It's
Same.
beautiful to see. And like you said, it doesn't have to be a huge thing. Like, nothing in the outward, except for me leaving my job at Yale, has changed. I have the same husband, same house, same everything, but I've changed inside.
Yeah.
I'm like a different person. And at one point I wasn't sure about my marriage because I was thought, and this was the story I was telling myself, that one of the reasons why I drank is because of my marriage. But then when I applied some of the tools of taking thoughts captive, I realized a lot of the thoughts and beliefs I even had about my marriage and my husband were just old, repeated thoughts, and that I could change those too. They weren't even true.
Oh, yeah.
And ended up improving my marriage. And it's not always the case for everyone, but for us, it was. And so it was a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the limiting beliefs that we have inside of us, right? And and that's the thing that can hold us back so strongly. And it's interesting when you're coaching someone and you can see that right off the bat, right? You can see there's a limiting belief there. And then just diving underneath that and starting to take it apart. It's just like you said, Susan, like, it wasn't my marriage. It was more the reflection of how I was viewing things. And that, that happens so often, relationships don't have to blow apart, but you need to change,
Yeah. Amazing. Well, this has been such an amazing conversation. It's now time, though, for our listeners' favorite part of our podcast show. Lorna, what do you do to feel lit? Yeah.
Well, let's see. I'm going to just actually give a recent experience in the last number of months. And, in January, my husband and I started into a whole weight training regime. And gotta say that when I first thought of doing this, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be super interesting, right? And so we had a little class that we took, and it was like over 4 weeks, and we learned in this little wonderful gym in our neighborhood with this really wonderful guy named Steve, who's a personal trainer. Anyway, the vibe in there is just really great. We feel really comfortable. But what I have learned is how amazing my body really is. And fast forward, almost going into 6 months, I just feel so much better. And it no longer is it about, how I physically look, it's how I feel. Yeah. And I again, now it's getting emotional, but honestly, like, I feel lit. I feel, we're going at 6 a.m. and we're going 3 times a week, and we're doing it together, and we're, because I got to have a guy spot you when you got a barbell over top of your face. It's kind of a good thing to do at 71. You don't want to lose your teeth. So, but I have to say that's what I'm doing right now. It's just really focusing on that, because I have many more Christmases in me, and I want to spend as much time as I can being healthy. So yeah.
Amazing.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I've recently started weight training too, and I know Susan does it. So yeah, I want to get those muscles. We keep hearing it like everywhere, right? Women, when you're in midlife or getting older, do the muscle, get the muscles. So
exactly.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you? We're going to post the links in the show notes, but is there anything you want to share before we wrap up about where they can find you? Or
yeah, they can find me at my website's lornawilsoncoaching.com, and there's some programs and things on there. And I just in general love talking to people about this kind of a subject, so don't hesitate to reach out if you want to chat. But yeah, that's where they can find me. So
well, thank you again for coming on our podcast as our special guest today. And
thank you.
Yeah, and to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this. And remember, it's never too late. You aren't there. You can reinvent yourself at any age. I'll even go 90. Yay! Yeah. And just listeners, remember, do something today to feel lit.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for listening to the Sober and Lit podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps get the word out.
And remember, do something today to help you feel lit.
See you next week.